Alright, in this tutorial we're going to talk about using the new auto bracketing feature that's built into DSLR camera remote. It's great when you're not quite sure what the correct exposure needs to be, or if you're doing HDR or high dynamic range imaging. Now some cameras will have some auto bracketing built into them, but most of the time it only photographs 3 pictures, one underexposed, one overexposed, and one at the correct exposure. With DSLR camera remote, you can shoot a bracket that contains over a dozen shots. Now before we start using it, we want to make sure that first our camera is in manual exposure mode, and we can check that right down here in the bottom of the LCD. And we want to make sure that our metering is set up properly for our shot. We basically want to have the middle or the baseline exposure already set. This is getting the majority of the midtones properly exposed. Alright, now once we have that, let's go ahead and press the options button, and I'm going to select auto bracket. Auto bracket has a series of different sliders that we use to adjust its options. The first one I want to adjust is whether I want to work in full stop or partial stop increments. Now you can work in full stop, that means it'll take a picture every stop, or you could work in third stop increments, meaning it'll take a picture every 1/3 of a stop. Some cameras you can also set it to a half stop as well. I'm going to work in full stop increments for this image. Let's go back. The upper slider lets us select the range, basically how many f-stops above and below our normal exposure. I'm going to go ahead and set this up to 2. That means it's going to take 5 pictures, and it tells us right here how many pictures our bracket is going to take. This will take 5 images. One that's 2 stops underexposed, one that's 1 stop underexposed, one at the correct exposure, then one that's 1 stop overexposed, and one that's 2 stops overexposed. That's usually a pretty good size. If I needed more, I could move this all the way up to 5 stops. And doing 5 stops with a 1 stop in between will actually yield 11 shots. That's a lot to stitch together. I'm going to go back down here to 2. There we go, 5 shots will be about right. The third option lets us lock a photographic variable. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. The default is going to be aperture. That means it's going to vary the shutter speed first and then the ISO second if it needs to. Most of the time it'll only have to use one variable, but if I'm at a very short or a very long shutter speed to start, it might need to spill over into another variable. Now most of the time aperture is the one you'd want to lock, but in this case we're doing kind of a special case. We're actually photographing moving water, and we want to make sure that the water has a consistent velvety look, so the shutter speed needs to be locked in this case. So I'm going to select the shutter speed option instead. There we go. The last option is a delay, and if you're using strobes with your camera, you want to make sure they have time to recycle. This lets you put in a recycling time to make sure that the flash recycles before your next shot. I'm not using any flash, I'm just going to leave it set to 0. This will photograph all 5 shots very quickly. When I'm ready, I'm just going to go ahead and press the start button. It'll now shoot that 5-shot bracket, and if I look down here at the bottom, it'll actually count the bracket for me. So it'll tell me how many images I have left. You can see how on each image the exposure varies. There we go. Now I have that 5-shot bracket that is both underexposed and overexposed that I can put into Photoshop or another HDR software to create a great looking high dynamic range image.